Hello. Hello, guys. Okay, so I'm Harry and from Alibaba. I'm co-chair of SIG-App Delivery. So I will host today's meeting for SIG-App delivery in July. So um, we don't have a lot of items in the agenda. So the first step, please add yourself in the attendees list by your name and your company. And if you are the first time to attend a meeting, you're very welcome to introduce yourself a little bit for other folks to know you and your background and maybe potential collaborations surrounding the field of cloud native application delivery. Okay, so anyone want to introduce yourself? Please go ahead. No, we are all friends. Yeah, so one quick update is that I didn't know that the KubeCon China was canceled, but there's a new conference which name is Cloud Native Summit, and open source Cloud Native and Open Source Summit in China will still happen, which will become virtual. And in that case, we still have several talks regarding to application delivery, and so if anyone want to join that conference, please register and attend. It's very easier as a virtual conference. I will send the link just in seconds. Yeah, here we go. And I just paste the link over there. So in this Cloud Native conference, we do have a keynote for the application delivery. So if you're interested to, please check the agenda. So this is the first information I want to sync with you guys. And second update from the co-chairs of SIG-App delivery is that, let me share my screen. Second update is for the Cloud Native build pack due diligence review that we actually finished the step in SIG-App delivery. And now pass to the TOC. And the only issue remaining in the Cloud Native build pack review is that the definitions around end users, which are a requirement for a incubation level project in CNCF, but the definition of end users was not clearly clarified before, and even we now added the definition in the charter, we still have issue like whether all projects need to follow that rule, or there can be some project, most of these adopters can be cloud providers. So this is what we are basically talking about recently. Oh, I feel I still a lot of people are interested in this conference. I just opened the link for you. So this is actually equivalent to the KubeCon China, while it changed the name and changed it to a new style, which was become virtual, and you can still register the conference. It will happen during the July 30 to August 1st, and it's basically like the virtual version of the KubeCon China, and they have both version of Chinese and the English schedule. And the keynote I mentioned is that, yeah, SIG app delivery have a keynote around into the 5 big challenges in app delivery and how we solve them, which was basically proposed by Alois to introduce several challenges we're facing around the application delivery and how we notice the community is trying to solve them, and as well as any pattern behind these solutions. So it's basically like this talk. So if you're interested in this topic, please join us. It's 3 p.m. of China's. I think it's Chinese Beijing time. Oh, that will be a little bit hard for people from the US. Anyway, let's move to the next step. The next item we have here is backstage demo. I'm not sure if backstage folks are already there. I can take over from here.
Yep, backstage folks are here.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So hi there, everybody. It's good to be back again this week. My name is Remy DeCosmaker. I'm the newly minted head of open source over at Spotify in our open source program office. And we are here because we just recently submitted our proposal to the sandbox for CNCF. So we know that the SIG-App delivery presentation isn't necessarily a requirement anymore, but we've been planning to make this presentation and are eager to share our work. So you can check out, if you haven't already seen, backstage.io. That has links to our Discord and our GitHub and all the places where you can find out more about the community, how to get involved. First of all, thank you everybody for having us. We're really glad to be here. And I want to introduce our PM for Backstage, Stefan Lund, who will be presenting today.
Hey everyone, again, thanks for having us. I will, how much time do we have, by the way?
15 minutes.
15?
Yeah.
Ah, cool. So we'll see if I have time for a demo, but at least I will do an introduction. So let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, perfect.
Very good. Okay, so I'm here to talk about Backstage, which is a project that we released about 3 months ago from Spotify. We pitch it as a thing, as an open platform for building developer portals, whatever that is. So before we start looking at what Backstage is, so what problem does Backstage try to solve? What we have seen, both in the community and also internally at Spotify, is that the number of infrastructure tools and services are just increasing fast. There's a lot of different projects in the CNCF landscape, and we have definitely built quite a lot of infrastructure ourselves. That's not necessarily like a problem in itself, but the problem we see is that when you start to introduce a lot of these different open source projects into your ecosystem in your company, and also start building a lot of it yourself, it's really hard, or it becomes hard for an individual engineer, a developer at your company to kind of make sense of all of these different tools. So all of these tools are built for a single purpose, and there's no real sort of connecting tissue between them. So for you as an engineer to be productive at a company, you kind of need to learn a lot of different infrastructure. And we don't really think that should be the case at Spotify. We don't think that our engineers should necessarily have to know and become fluent in all of these different open source projects and all various tools that we have just to become productive at Spotify. So the solution that we have come up with inside Spotify is to build basically one single consistent UI for all of our infrastructure. So rather than exposing all our engineers to the various tools directly, we have an integration layer that we call Backstage that basically hides and packages up all those different pieces into a consistent UI. This is our homegrown developer portal. And you can almost think of it as like an app store for developer tools. What we had before we had Backstage was a lot of different islands of infrastructure. Essentially, every team that built their own tool built a new island of infrastructure. and it became increasingly hard for our engineers to basically find all of those tools and to use them. And what we did was to build a centralized platform. And my team took on to become almost as like this platform centralized team, where we have on one side of this, let's say, marketplace almost, you have infrastructure teams that are building and exposing developer tools. And on the other side, you have engineers, like the end users of this product, which are then getting a consistent experience. And one of the reasons why we built this was actually that we were seeing Spotify becoming slower and slower as we were maturing and as we were adding more and more, like, technologies into our ecosystem. And we have seen that by centralizing and like taking all of our documentation and all of our tools into one place, we've been able to significantly improve things like developer onboarding times, etc. And while talking to our peers in the industry and kind of demonstrating backstage to others, we started seeing that this was not only a problem inside Spotify. Like tooling fragmentation and information being spread out all over your ecosystem is kind of a problem. It seems to be like an industry-wide problem, and therefore we think that backstage can help others as well, and we therefore decided to open source it and kind of share our what we have learned with the open source community. Some of the benefits of having one of these centralized entry points into your ecosystem is, for engineering managers, you can basically start to decide and build out and maintain what standards do you have, what practices do you want to encourage in your organization. How do you build microservices? How do you kind of, what are the preferred and best practices? And for end users, they get like one single place to go to build and maintain all of their software. And they know, they can see what is standardized, and they can find all their, all their software that they own and all the technical documentation in one place. And for platform engineers, as I was talking about before, it enables you to basically extend this platform by building additional tools and services into it, which makes it easier for people to discover your things. And this is what we call like building plugins, essentially. But how does this work? So at an overview, there are basically three different pieces to Backstage. First of all, we have what we call the service definition files, which are essentially metadata files that live together with your code in your various repositories. So these files are basically describing, what software this is and who owns it, and etc., and a bunch of other metadata about it. These service definition files are then registered, as we call it, inside this service catalog or software catalog, because it's not only about microservices. It actually tracks all types of different software, like libraries and websites, and inside Spotify we use it to track anything like machine learning projects, our mobile features, etc. You can think about all the different pieces that make up your software ecosystem. And what we've found is that once you have this centralized service catalog, it's a fantastic way to kind of introduce or integrate all the various different tools that you have that you want your engineers to use to manage their software. So we basically, on top of this service catalog, our engineering teams, or sorry, our platform teams, can integrate these plugins and expose various ways to manage your services or software through these plugins. So rather than you having to jump to your CI Jenkins UI to look at all the builds that are going on, you can basically navigate from the service catalog, find the service that you are interested in, and from there find a consistent CI interface. Similarly, you can look at your deployments for a specific service, or metrics or SLOs, or even checking your tech debt and if you have any security warnings, etc., for specific services or any software. So as I was saying beginning, Backstage is relatively new as an open source project. We released it in March, I think it was early March. We have to make it kind of, to talk about what, what we're working on. We have a very high level roadmap that we have divided into 3 different phases. And the first one is like to basically build this extensible front-end platform where platform teams can very easily build UI in the form of these plugins, and also extend the platform with different GitHub or like login mechanisms. The second phase, where we think the majority of Backstage users will have basically get value out of the box for Backstage, is the second one, phase number 2, which we call like the service catalog phase, which is where we are spending all of our engineering right now. And we recently released like the service catalog in alpha. The third phase is where we really hope that this becomes like, start to become really interesting. We envision that basically for all the different various open source projects and developer tools out there, we hope that there will be pre-built plugins, either built by Spotify, but the majority of them we hope will be built by the community. So if you walk up to Backstage, there should be a vast gallery of like open source integrations for all the different projects that you kind of have. So if you're using if you're using Kubernetes, there's a Kubernetes deployment view, and if you're using Grafana, there's a Backstage plugin for that. And if you're using Circle CI or Jenkins CI or whatever other CI, there's an existing pre-built like integration for it. And that kind of brings us to the long-term goal of Backstage as such. So we think that Backstage can become the UX layer for the open source infrastructure landscape. What we mean by that is that we think that there's a room for a project that kind of ties together all of these various distinct pieces, and by doing so improves the developer experience of the overall, using cloud native technologies and other projects that you have, and by doing that, kind of making engineers and developers' lives easier and more productive. That's kind of the overall gain here. And this is also then why we're kind of now in the process of donating Backstage to the CNCF. And as Remy was saying in the beginning, we have submitted a pull request to basically propose Backstage being given to the CNCF, essentially. All right. So do we have time for demo, or should we, or has the time passed?
Yeah, I think we still have time for demo. We don't have a lot of agendas after that, so go ahead.
Very good. Okay. So I will, sorry for all the noise. There's a lot of kids running around here. I hope you don't hear them that much. Anyway, so the first thing you do when you come to Backstage is you have to sign in. And we have tried to build a very generic way to sign in so that you can add whatever company sign-in auth provider you use, you should be able to plug that in. So we have provided Google, and the community has actually added Okta support, and recently, or earlier this week, we also got GitLab support provided by the community itself, which we are super keen and happy about. So if I log in, I'm greeted in Croatian, Dobre večer, I guess, and to the guest user. And from here, I can basically see the core experience here revolves around this service catalog. So you have all the services, and you can see the ones that I'm own, the ones that I've starred, the ones that I think are really important to me. But I can also look at all the different services, microservices that we have running in our company. And in this example, I have only like 5 ones. At Spotify, we have thousands of microservices, and it's really really nice and important to be able to have a centralized catalog where you have all your software. I can tell you that our compliance organization are the biggest fans for Backstage, because there's one single place for all the software, which is really nice for them. And of course, I can here search if I'm looking for the podcast thing. I can find not only the services like I own, but I can find all the different services across my company. And that makes it easier for you to sort of find what exists and like reduces the need for duplication, etc. Similarly, I can find, you know, whatever websites we have in our community and libraries, etc., and even technical documentation. Backstage also, I talked about how Backstage creates a standardized way to build software as well. And the way we do that is that basically by having a number of what we call golden path templates. So these templates are essentially like ways to build software in a standardized way. So if I wanted to create a website, I choose one of these pre-built templates, a React SSR template in this case, or if I wanted to build a backend service, you know, I would choose this Spring Boot service template. And if I create this one, I can fill out the name, CNCF demo something, and let's put the owner as guest. So, and then I specify where in GitHub I want this to be stored. And after filling in this information, I basically get a real project, like a real web application built for me. So this website basically, it follows our best practices here at Spotify, and it sets up like a Hello World web application with those best practices. And it, of course, automatically registers this piece of software into the catalog as well. So here I can go and I can see like my overview page. I get the website and it's named CNCF demo. And here you can start to see, like, you know, I can get all this Sentry alerts and I can get some information about it. As well as all the different various tools that are, you know, that I can use to manage this software that I created. I can also, when we create these components, and I go to my websites, and I can see the CNCF demo here now. If I jump over to GitHub, I can also see that this project exists, and it's also being built as we speak. So a new project has been created, and we automatically created like CI configuration files for you. In this example, we use like GitHub's actions, and I can basically see that like my CI environment automatically picks up this build and starts to, like, you know, to prepare the project. And this is another way of us kind of hiding a lot of configuration management from the users, and also sort of building in the preferred paths into these templates. All right. Another thing, the last thing I wanted to show is basically, apart from the service catalog, you can also pretty much integrate any kind of like infrastructure tool that you want to have in your in Backstage as a plugin. So we have an example here of a Tech Radar plugin, which helps engineers figure out, you know, what are the different codes and processes that or frameworks and processes that we use at Spotify to kind of help guide the decisions. Well, with that, I think I'm done. I think I've used up more time than I had. Sorry about that. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to field them.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So this is a very interesting project. So I have a very quick question. So I'm reading the documentation of Backstage project, and I noticed that you can actually add your applications into this portal, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So in that sense, it looks like the application is the source code directory of your software. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're talking about an application as a tool here, any tool can pretty much be built into Backstage. And we, inside Spotify, we have built over or various people at the company has built over 130 different plugins. So pretty much anything can be built in and integrated into Backstage. The service catalog is the core kind of piece that a lot of the tools that we have built are kind of hanging off of. The catalog itself is also developed as a plugin, as a standalone thing.
Okay, so do you have your own way to package the applications? Or for example, can I use Helm chart as the application in Backstage?
So Backstage, yes, you can. I mean, you can basically, when you define, assuming that you're talking about applications as like, microservices, if that's what you mean. What I showed you is like the standardized way we create software at Spotify. What you will, if you deploy Backstage in your company, you can yourself decide, what are the kind of templates and how does a, best practice backend service look like inside our company. And if you use Helm charts, you can, the templating system that we have can generate those Helm charts. At Spotify, we don't use Helm charts actually. But we do create like Kubernetes manifest files and all the configuration files for the user when they do this. So also try to, hide the complexity of those things away from the individual engineer.
Got it. Yeah, this is the question I have. Anyone else has other questions? Okay, so I think we can go to the next items. Just for the newcomers, if you haven't added your name to the attending list, please go ahead to add your name and your company. Yes, thank you. And the next step is update from the working group. I'm not sure if there are other chairs of the working groups under SIG-App delivery here to do any update. Matt, do you have anything to add? No, sure. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I can hear. Go ahead, Matt.
No.
No.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Yeah, I do have a small item to add because the air-gapped working group, they are trying to propose a new time for their meeting because the meeting time right now is not perfect. So if anyone want to give some feedback to their, they I think they created a vote or poll for the new time. So if you are interested in the air-gapped app delivery and you want to participate in the working group meeting, please go ahead to propose the new time for the meeting agenda, and I think they will very appreciate your input. So this is basically what I have: the air-gapped working group proposing for new time. Okay. And besides that, I do have the other thing which I want to share with you folks is that we are trying to bring up with a new idea around the new working group, which named the working group app definition or working group app application model. Because okay, so recently we do have some requirement from the community that how we can define application in Kubernetes. This discussion happened a lot in the community recently, and we do also notice that there are some KubeCon talks around this issue, and we also notice that every company basically have its own way to define or describe the application in the wild. So I think that's why we raised this question in the community as well. So the most straightforward way to define application, maybe from Kubernetes point of view, is to define deployment. But is that enough? We don't think so, because the reality is we notice that application in Kubernetes is basically very complicated. I mean, to define them, because in most cases, you will have multiple pieces of the API object to combine together as an application instead of just a pure deployment itself. So the real use case is more like this. So you will have deployment, you will have service, you will have the HPA, you will have ingress, you will have network policy, a lot of things attached to this deployment or attached to this workload you want to deploy. And this is the most common pattern we notice in Kubernetes to define application. And in the enterprise, however, the situation can become more complicated because your application maybe have not only one workload, right? For example, you will have your deployment as well as a maybe cloud service or a database to link to this workload. So you'll basically have multiple workloads in one application. And the other example I list here is that you may even have your own way to define workload. For example, in Alibaba, we create our own operator, which is named the clone set, to run our application, which are all basically stateful applications. So we use clone set to manage all the instances of the pod and treat them as stateful stateful instances because they need to strategies like in-place upgrade, something like that. And this also happens to cloud resources. For example, if you are in Crossplane or using any operator for the cloud services, you basically need to define a workload which is this time which is for cloud resources. For example, a RDS instance in Alibaba Cloud or a RDS instance in AWS Cloud. So you combine multiple pieces of this workload together as part of the application. And the second part is a bunch of capabilities you want to attach to these workloads, which including the HPA, ingress, and mission, but they can be more because you basically still have multiple components and multiple services you want to attach to this application, to this workload. So in the real world, in enterprises, become more and more complicated. And that's why there are some discussions, for example, in news stacks asking the question, why applications are fundamentally different in Kubernetes? Because you can see here, it's very different from what we mentioned about application before. So before, my application is just maybe an artifact, maybe a binary, or maybe just a Docker image, right? But today in Kubernetes, your application is quite complicated. It's combines with a lot of objects. And some of them are even not in the concern of the developer at all. So if you look at this pattern behind the application in Kubernetes area, maybe we can find some pattern behind them. For example, we can notice that the application today is composed by multiple components, and every component have its own workload and a bunch of capability attached to the workload, and then we deploy this unit as a whole in the Kubernetes as application. And we can also use Helm charts to do that. For example, in Helm charts, we basically combine a lot of pieces together by using Helm charts template, and then we add values to them. And in some cases, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can use Customize to do that as well, to organize the multiple pieces of your application, because we noticed that Customize also introducing feature which name it components, more like reusable components or reusable overlays that you can use to customize the application. So in modern application, we noticed that there are some patterns behind them, but it's not very clear yet. That's why the community and culture is talking about we can maybe create the working group to push the direction, to standardize the direction.
Yeah, I have questions here. I've got questions here. So everything so far that's been talked about is related to Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. And Kubernetes has SIG apps, and Kubernetes had a app definition working group that did a whole bunch of work and had conversations on this previously. So my question is what is needed now that's different from what's already been created or done before, or that's different from the scopes of taking this to Kubernetes SIG apps?
Yeah,
which actually owns the link you're talking about there.
Yeah, because scope here, we are intention to make it beyond Kubernetes.
So what is it you want to do beyond Kubernetes? And I ask this because Microsoft and Alibaba got together for the one model, and I'm forgetting the name of it, that had to do with the spec where you could define something and then convert it to Kubernetes. They use the CRD
model, OAM.
Yep, OAM. Thank you. Then more recently, Amazon has released something similar to that as well that sits at a higher level. And so we see different groups creating these different things. Is the CNCF looking to create another thing that's in addition to that? And is it on to us to go do something like that if the community is actually creating something itself or multiple things?
So I don't think the app delivery want to create something similar to that. So we don't want to create something similar to that. I think we are more trying to create a working group to combine the effort together to find the patterns behind these things to improve the interoperability between these kind of different definitions and models of these applications. And you just mentioned every company or every organization trying to create their own things, correct? So whether can we find some patterns and best practice behind them? For example, what is the best practice or best scenarios for this Kubernetes application CRD used for? And what is the other practices or scenarios which is maybe suitable for, or as you mentioned, AWS had SAM, right? So what's the pattern behind it here? What's the best practice here? So I will expect the white paper, something like that, will be an outcome of this working group. Does that make sense to you?
And it's going to go beyond Kubernetes, right? So it won't just be Kubernetes based. You might say AWS and virtual machines, you'll do the same things. Because if this is Kubernetes based and just Kubernetes, Kubernetes SIG-Apps has focused on this in the past, has it within its scope. And so I would expect it to be part of that SIG rather than this SIG creating a working group on it, if it's solely Kubernetes focused. Now, if it's going to go beyond Kubernetes and talk about maybe AWS and cloud native, and it's going to use maybe a different container scheduler in there like Nomad, how would you do this with Nomad as well? And its general patterns, then there might be a reason here. But I would be, what?
Well, I mean, you are correct here. We want to involve Nomad, we want to involve maybe Lambda, and we want to, that's why we say we call for projecting scope ideas. So how can we define application on top of Nomad?
So who from Nomad are we going to have involved in this? Who uses Nomad or uses Lambda to be involved in working on this?
Of course, that is also what I'm proposing here. Yeah, code for projecting scope ideas. So what kind of, for example, as you mentioned, it's multiple runtimes, correct? So for multiple runtimes, what are the best practice for them or for the whole community to define applications on top of for these runtimes? Maybe some of this definition can even be reused for different runtime. For example, can we use AWS SAM for both Lambda and for Nomad, correct? Or what's the practice to do that? So the whole working group is about how can we make everything more clear. So okay, how can I define application in Kubernetes, in Nomad, and even in Lambda? So today, this part is still missing. And I was not saying missing, it's just very fragmented.
What's the use case for defining an application one way that can be deployed across multiple environments like that?
It doesn't have to be one way. It can be multiple ways, but the question is how? So how can I define application on top of Nomad? How can I define application on top of Lambda? Should I use SAM or should I use Kubernetes CRD here? You're not going
to use a Kubernetes CRD to define something that runs inside of Nomad because that's a Kubernetesism.
I'm not sure about that. Can I create an operator for that? Can I create operator for Nomad to use Kubernetes application CRD? I think it seems possible. Should I do that?
To extend the Nomad API to start accepting CRDs, does Nomad allow you to extend its API that way?
No, but you can still run Nomad workloads from Kubernetes. Kubernetes do not stop you from that.
Yeah, but you still have Kubernetes in the loop then, and you're just talking to its API, and you're basically using Kubernetes is this way. It's still very Kubernetes. Kubernetes becomes your management layer. It's not a portable application that you can take from Kubernetes to Nomad. It's saying now use Kubernetes as your management layer for Nomad, and you're going to do something different to manage it there. And so the question would be, are people actually wanting to see that and understand it?
I don't
Like,
know.
where is the problem we're trying to solve and who's asking for what? I'm trying to understand that.
The question asking is, just as you mentioned, should we do that or not? Should we use Kubernetes application definitions as the definition for other runtimes or not? That's what the discussion we want to raise and we want to answer.
What would be okay, so let me ask this. Does anybody have one benefit for doing that? And is it even feasible?
So you basically have a unified control plane to do that. Right? A lot of people is asking for the control plane for the multiple runtimes and the whole platform.
Where are they asking for this? Ooh, so I want to understand. So they're asking for one runtime for multiple platforms. So I'll use one runtime to run my applications in Nomad and Kubernetes and maybe in AWS, my VMs. They're asking for one runtime to do this?
One control plane, not run one time.
I'm sorry, not one runtime, one control plane. Where are they asking for this? I've got a ton of questions to understand the use case. Is this documented anywhere? Is there any details?
That's a good chance for you to follow up in this working group. That's why we want to create a working group talking about that. So if you say, no, we don't do that, it's okay. Write down in a white paper, tell people about best practices, right? That's the direction of this working group trying to solve.
So, but the best practices would be the practices people are doing, right? You document what's working. Are people actually doing a single control plane for multiple runtimes that are that varied today?
Then we write it down, right?
Well, if they're not doing it, where do we get a best practice from?
I don't know.
Like if there's
about the best practice. So you're talking about practice today, right? So what will be the best practice in your mind? Write that down.
But a best practice in my mind, as somebody who isn't doing this and isn't going through the day-to-day and hasn't even done a proof of concept of it, is just me as a talking head telling other people what I think they should do without any actual experience doing that. And that's not a great idea to have, right? People who actually do this and solve it and understand it should describe how that stuff works and how you can be successful and then the pitfalls of it. But if a bunch of people get together who've never done this to try to tell people how to do something that nobody's doing, right, then it's the blind leading the blind. We don't know because we haven't done it. We don't know the pitfalls.
I can't get to a point, Matt. You're saying that we don't even want to discuss that, or you are saying that will not happen because so we don't need to discuss it. I don't know your point.
I'm saying that if we can't find people who are doing it, then who's qualified to write a paper to tell other people to do it? And if we don't know anybody who's doing it, then who do we invite to come be involved in this?
So we don't even try that, right? You mean we don't even want to try that to find somebody to talk about that?
No, I'm saying we find somebody, but I would not put the cart before the horse. If we can't find anybody who's doing it, then how can we get anybody together to write papers on it?
That means
right?
Another direction. So as you mentioned, we want to describe the practice that people are doing today, right? We're not saying that you should do that. For example, if nobody is using Kubernetes as control plane here, then practice will be another way. Multiple people have multiple ways to do that. And we write it down. We're not saying that you have to use Kubernetes as a control plane. I don't know how you get that point from here.
Sorry, I'm trying to figure out the scope and the purpose here. Like, what's the end goal? Just to write a white paper? So who are we going to have so the goal is to describe, here's how you would describe an application. Like, so when the SIG-App delivery, or what was the name of it? Whatever the SIG, the app delivery working group or app definition working group in Kubernetes, when they got together to go look at this, we spent a lot of time talking about what is the semantics of an application compared to not an application. How does this stuff work together, right? So you take WordPress, right? And WordPress uses a MySQL compliant database. So is the database an application? Yes. But it's also part of a larger application, WordPress, right? Yeah. That's an application. So how do you differentiate those? And how do you use language around that? That's why Kubernetes does workloads a lot. And then how do you differentiate and draw lines and then document metadata? Something that was come up to. So you see the application specification. There's actually common labels and annotations that this working group came up with that document those things. And so there's a whole bunch of things that came out. Is the idea to maybe collect this and put it into a, is it to come up with new things? Like I'm trying to understand what the scope scope is here, what the output, who it's for, who's got experience in this and is going to be able to write it from their experience and knowledge on it, and actually create something particularly useful and who it would be useful for.
So just animation. So for example, you are pretty qualified for this discussion, I noticed, right? So why don't you give some input? How people are managing application today, to define application today, from your perspective in Kubernetes, that will be, I think that potentially have very potentially to become the best practice for Kubernetes application, right? And we can find someone similar like you from Norman, from HashiCorp, from AWS to write down a similar thing, right? The practice for different runtimes to define application. And maybe even we can find some pattern behind them. Maybe we can find some pattern, general pattern behind them. That is a possibility. So the outcome of this working group will just animation, the practices of runtime today, some patterns behind them, what can we benefit from them is maybe in the future, we will have standardized way to define applications across the runtimes.
Who's the output audience of this?
The developer maintainers or software maintainers, software owners.
The software owners who are writing applications like WordPress?
Deploy applications.
So the people who deploy and operate applications, those are often people who are different than the people. It's a different role than the person who develops it. The people who develop MariaDB are not the people who are setting it up to run inside of Kubernetes. And so it's separate roles quite often. And so that's why I would zoom in on who's doing what. So we're looking at the people who operate applications in each environment to give guidance to them. So the newcomers who are coming saying, here's a practical how-to guide. Is that it?
Something like that. I still can't get your point here. So we don't even start a discussion, right? And if you want to raise discussion, I think the working group is a very good place for you to start a discussion. Why don't you start a discussion over there? Or you just trying to say that?
Well, I'm still trying to understand the reason to have a working group and why it's not just part of SIG-App delivery here. Like, why isn't it SIG-App delivery deals with apps, right? So why is a separate working group being broken off for something that could be a part of the main discussion? Yeah, is it a big enough deal to create a working group and to bring all these things in? Or is this the kind of thing that, say, the AWS folks will just say, it's already documented in our docs over here, go read. Or it's something we say, oh, it's a gap in the Kubernetes docs. And some Kubernetes folks go off and just say, oh, we should go add this to our docs. Like, I'm still trying to understand what the need is, how it incorporates, why it justifies adding another working group.
Yeah, so I think the motivation here is that we notice that we can find enough people to create a working group. As you said, if we can't, it's done, right? But we are thinking about that. We can create a working group because there are a lot of interested parties can be engaged in this field, correct?
So I feel like there might be a gap here, Matt, but I think my preference would be for us to actually define a little bit more about the what we want to do and the why we want to do it, and then find a home for it. If a home already exists, then we don't have to, do anything new. But I think just saying there might be a home for something we haven't defined yet is premature. So I think we need to define a little bit more about what we were thinking about here, and then we can determine if there's a better home for it.
I like that. Let's define it. And maybe my issue, probably put more clearly, I think you did it well, is I don't see enough definition. So if I try to read between the lines, there's a lot of what ifs.
Okay. So you want to add more input regarding to the working group, correct, Matt?
Well, I don't want to add more input to it because I don't know what you're all trying to get at. What's the goal? What's in scope? What's out of scope? Why is it happening? What's calling for this to be created? Because a working group needs to go chase down and try to solve a problem. It's not just there because some people say, ooh, we want to tell people what we want to say. It's really to solve a problem for end users to be useful for this, so the CNCF can be useful. So what's the problem people are running into and what needs to be solved?
So you can make it clear, correct? Right on.
No, not me. You all need to make it clear because I'm still not sure what needs to be done and who has a real problem that needs to be solved here rather than a problem that I make up. Who has a real problem, and because this working group should go out and seek those people to collect information on their need in order to try to craft something that solves it. And so who has a real problem, and to kind of define that and who that audience is and what they need and all of that stuff. And I can't define it because I'm not sure who it is.
Yeah, so I think we will do that. Is that fine to you?
That's fine. I look forward to reading it.
Yeah, great to know that. Okay, yeah, so this is idea about the working group, and I think just as Matt suggested, we will try to write down something around its scope, ideas, target audiences, what we want to expect as the outcome from the working group. Yeah. So this is what we have on the topic today, and I'm not sure if anyone have any others to add. Okay, so this is today's SIG-App delivery meeting, and very good to see you folks, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, bye-bye.